charge not to be evaded, insomuch as the accuser selected the worst features of the emperor's character and grounded his case on them. The things were true, and so were believed to have been said. Hispo added that Marcellus had placed his own statue above those of the Caesars, and had set a bust of Tiberius on another statue from which he had struck off the head of Augustus. At this the emperor's wrath blazed forth, and breaking through his habitual silence, he exclaimed that in such a case he would himself too give his vote openly on oath, and that the rest might be under the same obligation. There lingered even then a few signs of expiring freedom, and so Cnaeus Piso asked, "In what order will you vote, Caesar? If first, I shall know what to follow; if last, I fear that I may differ from you unwillingly." Tiberius was deeply moved, and repenting of the outburst, all the more because of its thoughtlessness, he quietly allowed the accused to be acquitted of the charges of treason. As for the question of extortion, it was referred to a special commission. Not satisfied with judicial proceedings in the Senate, the emperor would sit at one end of the praetor's tribunal, but so as not to displace him from the official seat. Many decisions were given in his presence, in opposition to improper influence and the solicitations of great men. This, though it promoted justice, ruined freedom. Caius Aurelius, for example, a senator, complained that the foundations of his house had been weakened by the pressure of a public road and aqueduct, and he appealed to the Senate for assistance. He was opposed by the praetors of the treasury, but the emperor helped him and paid him the value of his house, for he liked to spend money on a good purpose, a virtue which he long retained when he had cast off all others. To Propertius Celer, an ex-praetor, who sought because of his indigence to be excused from his rank as a senator, he gave 1,000,000 sesterces, having ascertained that he had inherited poverty. He bade others who attempted the same prove their case to the Senate. As for the love of strictness, he was harsh even when he acted on right grounds. Consequently, every one else preferred silence and poverty to confession and relief. In the same year the Tiber, swollen by continuous rains, flooded the level portions of the city. Its subsidence was followed by a destruction of buildings and of life. Thereupon Asinius Gallus proposed to consult the Sibylline books. Tiberius refused, veiling in obscurity the divine as well as the human. However, the devising of means to confine the river was entrusted to Attius Capito and Lucius Arruntius. Achaia and Macedonia, on complaining of their burdens, were, it was decided, to be relieved for a time from proconsular government, and to be transferred to the emperor. Drusus presided over a show of gladiators, which he gave in his own name and in that of his brother Germanicus, for he gloated intensely over bloodshed, however cheap its victims. This was alarming to the populace, and his father had, it was said, rebuked him. Why Tiberius kept away from the spectacle was variously explained. According to some, it was his loathing of a crowd; according to others, his gloomy temper, and a fear of contrast with the gracious presence of Augustus. I cannot believe that he deliberately gave his son the opportunity of displaying his ferocity and provoking the people's disgust, though even this was said. Meanwhile, the unruly tone of the theatre, which first showed itself in the preceding year, broke out with worse violence, and some soldiers and a centurion, besides others of the populace, were killed, and the tribune of the praetorian cohort was wounded, while they were trying to stop insults to the magistrates and the strife of the mob. This disturbance was the subject of a debate in the Senate, and opinions were expressed in favor of the praetors having authority to scourge actors. Hatarius Agrippa, tribune of the people, interposed his veto, and was sharply censured in a speech from Asinius Gallus, without a word from Tiberius, who liked to allow the Senate such shows of freedom. Still the interposition was successful, because Augustus had once pronounced that actors were exempt from the scourge, and it was not lawful for Tiberius to infringe his decisions. Many enactments were passed to fix the amount of their pay, and to check the disorderly behavior of their partisans. Of these the chief were that no senator should enter the house of a pantomime player, that Roman knights should not crowd round them in the public streets, and that they should exhibit themselves only in the theatre, and that praetors should be empowered to punish with banishment any riotous conduct in the spectators. A request from the Spaniards that they might erect a temple to Augustus in the colony of Tarraco was granted, and a precedent thus given for all the provinces. When the people of Rome asked for a remission of the 1% tax on all saleable commodities, Tiberius declared by edict that the military exchequer depended on that branch of revenue, and, further, that the state was unequal to the burden, unless the 20th year of service was to be that of a veteran's discharge. Thus the ill-advised results of the late mutiny, by which the limit of 16 campaigns had been extorted, were cancelled for the future. A question was then raised in the Senate by Arruntius and Aetius, whether, in order to restrain the inundations of the Tiber, the rivers and lakes which swell its waters should be diverted from their courses. A hearing was given to embassies from the municipal towns and colonies, and the people of Florentia begged that the Clanis might not be turned out of its channel and made to flow into the Arnus, as that would bring ruin on themselves. Similar arguments were used by the inhabitants of Interamna. The most fruitful plains of Italy, they said, would be destroyed if the river Nar, for this was the plan proposed, were to be divided into several streams and overflow the country. Nor did the people of Reate remain silent. They remonstrated against the closing up of the Veline lake, which empties itself into the Nar, as it would burst in a flood on the entire neighborhood. Nature had admirably provided for human interests in having assigned to the rivers their mouths, their channels, and their limits, as well as their sources. Regard, too, must be paid to the different religions of the allies, who had dedicated sacred rites, groves, and altars to the rivers of their country. Tiber himself would be altogether unwilling to be deprived of his neighboring streams and to flow with less glory. Either the entreaties of the colonies, or the difficulty of the work, or superstitious motives prevailed, and they yielded to Piso's opinion, who declared himself against any change. Pupius Sabinus was continued in his government of the province of Moesia, with the addition of Achaia and Macedonia. It was part of Tiberius's character to prolong indefinitely military commands, and to keep many men to the end of their life with the same armies and in the same administrations. Various motives have been assigned for this. Some say that, out of aversion to any fresh anxiety, he retained what he had once approved as a permanent arrangement; others that he grudged to see many enjoying promotion. Some again think that though he had an acute intellect, his judgment was irresolute, for he did not seek our eminent merit, yet he detested vice. From the best men he apprehended danger to himself, from the worst, disgrace to the state. He went so far at last in this irresolution, that he appointed to the provinces men whom he did not mean to allow to leave Rome. End of Book 1, Part 4.